Grand Teton National Park. A photographer's paradise. A place with magical sunrises, abundant wildlife, and breathtaking hikes. I've always heard that photographers love this place, but I never quite understood why until I went there. Like, really understood it. In September, I spent some time exploring Grand Teton National Park, located near Jackson, Wyoming. The park is home to the Teton mountain range as well as the valley known as Jackson Hole. The park is south of Yellowstone National Park, but it's a lot smaller. I visited both parks, and while I enjoyed them both, Grand Teton is the one that stole my heart. Grand Teton is home to many different lakes, including Jackson Lake, the famous Jenny Lake, and my personal favorite, Taggard Lake. They're all beautiful in their own ways because you've got that dramatic mountain view behind all of them. The Snake River also runs through the region, attracting lots of wildlife and, of course, creating more beautiful scenery for photography. For more than half of my visit, however, the whole area was covered in thick smoke from the wildfires on the west coast. On some days, I couldn't see the Teton mountain range at all, which was really depressing. But I decided to use those days to look for wildlife and to do a little bit more wildlife photography than anything else. And I definitely got a couple of interesting sunrises and sunsets. Due to the smoke, they looked really unique and they were still worth photographing. When the skies were clear, I spent more time photographing the mountains from various different vantage points and creating some time lapses. There are a number of spots that photographers gravitate to. A lot of the photos you'll see on calendars or postcards were taken in these spots, and for good reason. The first, and potentially the most famous, spot for photography is the Moulton Barn. This barn is part of Mormon Row, a historic district that consists of a few building clusters in the middle of the valley. While this barn looks great at any time of day, it looks particularly magical if you can capture it during a nice sunrise or sunset. I came here 3 times. During my first visit, I came in the middle of the day when the light was harsh. There were, however, tons of bison all around the barn, and it was quite a magnificent sight. I kept a safe distance and used my telephoto zoom lens to photograph them. The second time I came at sunrise. There were a lot of other photographers there that morning, and for good reason. The colors were incredible. Definitely worth waking up for. The third time I came briefly for a sunset, but nothing beat that first sunrise. Another famous spot for photography is Schwabacher Landing, which is where you can get a beautiful reflection of the Tetons in the water. I came here right after sunrise and I still had some nice colors. There were definitely a lot of people at this spot, even in the early morning. The parking lot filled up quickly. But honestly, there are tons of overlooks and random places to stop where you can capture beautiful sunrises and sunsets without too many other people around. People tend to gravitate to the same areas, but there are a lot of other places to pull over and enjoy the views. Another famous place for wildlife spotting and photography is Oxbow Bend, although personally I didn't spend too much time here because there are so many other great spots that were closer to me, and there's just so many spots in general. Now, one place I spent a lot of time on during my trip was Moose Wilson Road, which is a well-known spot for wildlife. I drove this road several times a day, and I definitely spotted a lot of wildlife here, especially at dawn and dusk. There's an overlook point with a parking lot where I saw moose almost every single day. I also had a couple of black bear encounters here because there were a lot of hawthorne berry bushes that these bears would go to every single day. And in general, the bears spend a lot more time foraging for food in the fall. On one morning, I was just walking around near this overlook point off of Moose Wilson Road, and a black bear and her cub came out of nowhere and they crossed the path in front of me. There were only 2 other people around. The bears were not concerned with our presence though, and they just continued along their way to the next berry bush. It made for some great photos, which were all taken with my Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens. But word gets out quick. Within an hour, there were probably 100 people there, all taking pictures of the bears. That's one thing I noticed in the Tetons. Whenever there's a really cool wildlife encounter, word spreads quickly and people will gather around to take photos. Some people definitely got too close, and wildlife management showed up quickly to set the boundaries. As a photographer, I always strive to get the best possible photos when I go on a trip somewhere, but of course, I also want to hike, relax, and just disconnect and enjoy the moment. It's definitely a balancing act. During the day when the lighting was harsh, I took fewer photos and I just enjoyed being outside. At sunrise and sunset, however, I couldn't help myself and I always focused on photography. I took a bunch of lenses with me on this trip, but whenever I was hiking or doing something where I needed to minimize the weight on my back, I took only 2 lenses with me. The first lens was always my wide-angle lens, which I use for landscapes and time lapses, the Canon 16 to 35mm f2.8. The second lens was a 150 to 600mm telephoto lens by Sigma, which was great for wildlife photography. I'll link to both of those below in case you want to read more about them. But having these 2 lenses gave me a pretty good range to capture a variety of different images. As a photographer, if you come out here, you'll probably find yourself wishing you had more zoom to capture some of those wildlife sightings. In many cases, even my 600mm lens wasn't enough, and I just had to accept the fact that not everything is meant to be recorded. Now, I definitely plan to come back to the Tetons again, and honestly, I will probably come back again next September. Fall is elk rutting season, and you'll hear the elk bugling at dawn and dusk. It's a creepy sound, but so very cool. Bears and other animals are also trying to put on weight in preparation for winter, so people apparently see them more often. And I definitely saw a lot of them. Mostly black bears. And finally, the fall foliage is just so beautiful. Yes, the nights are freezing cold, but I can live with that. I'll take those fall colors over summer temperatures any day. Grand Teton National Park is a photographer's paradise, and now I understand why. I will surely be back. I stopped at almost every overlook point and notable spot, but if I were to mention them all, this video would just be way too long. Just know that there's a lot to discover out there. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to stay tuned for my grizzly bear photography in Montana, which comes with a very cool story, then you will definitely want to subscribe. Until next time.